Well, welcome to the Dapper Dollars Leadership Insights series, where we empower professionals with practical tips and leadership strategies straight from top industry leaders. You see, at Dapper Dollars, our mission is simple: help people look good, feel good, and do good through smart financial and leadership choices. Today's conversation is especially important, building resilient teams in an era where disruption is becoming the norm. You see, but now my co-host Aneban is feeling a bit under the weather, so I will be moderating solo today. Mate, I wish you a speedy recovery. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our exceptional guest. But before doing that, I want to set the scene. So imagine it's 3:17 a.m. and your phone rings. You find out that a major supplier in South America just went offline. You're browsing through the news, then you see that there was an unexpected political unrest which has shut down your supplier's operations indefinitely. Now, you have shipping containers en route, a product launch in 2 weeks, and retailers waiting with empty shelves. You also have senior leadership wanting options from you now. Your team is looking for direction. They don't have enough information or facts to make any easy decision. The clock is ticking. Now, that is the reality supply chain leaders face. In this episode, we're talking with someone who has been in that seat. So even if you're not in supply chain, we'll be unpacking how to lead teams when the path is unclear and how to make tough decisions without all the data. And most especially, I'll say how to build teams that don't just survive uncertainty, but they grow stronger because of it. So we are thrilled to have Ben Ogidan join us today, a standout leader in the world of procurement, operations, and financial strategy. Ben leads Equinor's Procurement Competence Center for the US, Canada, and Argentina, overseeing procurement services for major energy business units. His leadership has been more than instrumental in driving operational excellence, digital transformation, and supply chain resilience across complex markets. Ben's journey across finance and supply chain, I'll say, in the management space, gave him this unique and powerful perspective. And today we're going to be digging into how leaders can successfully navigate through disruptions and lead teams that thrive in uncertain times. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome, I appreciate that, and again, thank you so much for being part of this. This has been a long time coming, and you being agreeing to come on our series is something we treasure and we are grateful for. I just want to put that out there as well.
I really appreciate it. Warm welcome.
Brilliant. So before we get started, we have this really fun thing we sort of introduce as a segment. It's called the icebreaker, where we get to ask you a few questions, just to loosen limbs and before we kind of go into our conversation. So I'm going to ask you quick icebreaker questions and would love your perspective and answers to that, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, starting off, are you more of a morning person or a night owl?
Man, those are some difficult questions to put in a box. I would say I'm a night owl, but given that I work a lot with colleagues in Europe, I tend to have to wake up in the morning. So I'm used to working in the morning too. Just so it depends on the pace of the week. But generally, my default has been a night owl.
Wow, I appreciate that. That's actually a really good perspective. And the other part I asked, are you more someone who prefers like a fast-paced, chaotic environment, or are you preferable to like structure and calm in how you operate?
I Interestingly, I would say I like chaos. And why do I say that? I would say it kind of energizes me, right? If it's consistently structured, then I'm worried something is missing, right? So what are we trying to transform? What are we trying to improve, right? What's missing? So in a way, I enjoy the chaos, but then once in the chaos, I bring structure to the chaos.
I love
Yeah,
that. I love that.
yeah.
I think I would be stating that tagline line from you. That's a cool one. When you're in chaos, you bring structure to it. I love that.
Yeah.
Lastly, if you could have any leadership superpower, what would it be?
I would really think it's about the growth mindset in any condition, just always focusing on what are the positive outcomes that you can get from any situation. So in your introductory, you gave kind of a context or scenario around
Mm.
maybe a crisis in South America, right? within that crisis, there are opportunities. We just have to find it. So it's about having the growth mindset. Would be kind of my focus. Yeah.
I love that go mindset, and I think it's so good because that is the perfect segue to going into the main, like, the meat of questions we have. So you have led diverse teams through, like, separate, like, diverse business units. I'm say safe to say. Can you share, like, a defining leadership moment what that taught you how to lead under pressure?
Wow, wow, wow. The reflection I have is maybe 2 years into my leadership journey in procurement. I had just moved from the finance team, joined the procurement team. I think this was in 2018,
Mm,
and the procurement team was just getting out of an internal audit that didn't look good. Our inventory management wasn't in control. Things were obsolete. People were ordering things that were not um, pre-approved, right? There was no transparency, and our business was losing money. So there was the pressure of the internal audit and a business that's losing money. Um, Coming into that, it was important for me to make sure I'm not coming in and beating down the team,
mm,
because we need people thinking clearly to achieve results. So in that particular instance, I was getting a lot of pressure from senior level management,
mm,
but I was trying to minimize the impact it had on my direct people. Of course, being very transparent with a challenging context. Over the course of 2, 3 weeks, I met with stakeholders, met with my team, because of course at that time I didn't have a lot of fundamentals in supply chain, in inventory management. I assessed the guys in the team in the offshore that had expertise, understanding from an inventory management perspective, on onshore similarly, and then reaching out to the business to understand their priorities. And then quickly came up with kind of a three frame priority.
mm,
Sustainable controls was one of it. And so we need to have control of what we're doing and standardization with the processes, optimizing inventory, because we were more of a reactory organization than being a proactive planning organization. And then the third one was cost transparency. And that really revolved around the third party 20 plus material management company that was managing our inventory, that was cut across three locations, one in North Dakota, one in Pennsylvania, and one in Texas. One team working three different ways
no,
on similar assets, on similar processes. That couldn't work. So over the next year, we documented all the processes across all three, having them work as one team to define those processes and agree
mm,
what those processes should be aligned with our global management system. We ensured that all inventories being purchased were purchased only if there were pre-approved budgets in place, pre-approvals in place. It's not an engineer just willing, I need this, and because I don't know what the lead time is, I'm going to buy it. But then 6 months later, he changes his job, and now you're left with that item, and what are you going to do with it? Right? When it came to the inventory itself, I noticed we were always having like write-offs of 5, 10, $15 million every year on obsolete inventories, or inventories that were not being used. And then we have to go either try to get rid of it or sell it in the surplus market for 10, 15%. That had to stop. So checking on the lead time, on how long it takes, then drove when we order things. Secondarily, ensuring that there's a plan for spare parts. We did not want to disrupt operations, because then if you're having to rush and order critical spare parts, you're probably ordering it at a higher cost, right? So with a lot of planning, improving that. And then on the cost transparency, I noticed that the company that was managing our inventories cost had gone up by almost 80% over a 3 year period, just incremental. At the same time, our physical management was going the opposite direction. So we had to rebase, realign with them. And within the first year, we were able to cut the cost by 35% while improving on the controls, while optimizing the inventory. So those were the kind of the three set priorities. It fits the internal audit context, but it also fit the business context. And I reminded my guys at that time, for every $6 million or $7 million optimizing inventory, that translated into one free onshore well.
Yeah.
So that's free production. So if you able to simplify things to where people know that they're directly impacting the business, even in a crisis, you can find opportunities. So I'll probably consider that one of my defining moments.
I love that. I love that. And I think not only that, the fact that you also had the, the framework to know with this, know with the, the SSC, but also being able to prioritize building trust first, with the team. A lot of people, they go in and it's all axe swinging and looking to like take up heads, but you wanted to build trust. And so I think that now played into how you got your stakeholder buy-in and everything like that. I really do appreciate that. And that takes me to my follow-up question. So again, when crisis, again, this is prior to or even after you've had that
Yeah.
role, when crisis strikes, like what is the first leadership instinct you rely on, and how has that instinct served you, um, so to say?
For me, I'd say I consciously have to remind myself to stay calm. I consciously have to remind myself to stay calm, um, because there's so much ambiguity in
Yeah.
crisis, right? So the calmness is the first thing, but then secondarily, I quickly need to gather as much facts of the situation as much as possible, right? And then quickly assessing the risk and the impact of the whole scenario before then jumping into kind of solutioning. So in a way, I think the calmness is the first thing one always has to remember, because if you're not calm, your emotions take over and then you become illogical,
Yeah.
right? So you have to stay calm despite everything going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that. And I think, kind of calling on calm, I think that helps you. And like you said, when I actually, you're someone who likes to bring structure to chaos, and
yeah,
that sort of speaks to it. I know one thing that I do, again, when we have our conversations, because the both of us do have finance backgrounds, and so, and as you mentioned, just like, in the previous question I asked, like how you were able to like tackle that situation you were in 2018, I felt like having that very good foundational finance background was helped you set up those frameworks. But going forward, like how has that background shaped the way you lead supply chain teams, and especially through like crisis and complexity as well?
I think, yeah, I would first say supply chain leaders
Mm,
have to have a very broad perspective to the business. We have to understand the business drivers. We have to be partners with the business. And at the same time as we are partners with the business,
mm,
we also have to be close to our suppliers, right? So when you take that into my background in finance, I was fortunate enough when I joined my current company to be able to support in North America business with the planning, performance, and risk management. And it's a multi-billion-dollar business. And that gave exposure to the corporate C-suite that ranged from business development all the way to operations, all the way to HR. And I had to follow up on understanding their risk, understanding their opportunities,
mm,
and their mitigation actions on behalf of senior leadership. So quarterly reviews on all those things. So we cannot be successful in our supply chain roles if we don't truly understand what the future business outlook looks like. And if we're not understanding that, we cannot translate that to how we engage with our suppliers. We cannot translate that into how we work in category strategies, how we build segments
mm,
of how we want to face the market, because we are literally translating business context into engagement with the suppliers. So I would say risk management, understanding the business drivers, and really looking forward 5 years, 10 years, what's going on dynamically. What are some disruptors, right? Like you discussed earlier, what are some disruptors that could impact the business? Do you know your supplier? Do you know the end-to-end drivers, the risk in their own supply chain? So my team, I challenge them to have market intelligence to understand what's going on, right? Because otherwise you become reactive.
I see.
And there are a lot of things that you cannot control, but there are also a lot of things you can control. So that ability to manage risk and discuss with the business to understand and plan better limits the disruptions. Of course, you cannot avoid when they occur. You just manage as you can, but at least you can leverage that risk management and planning to enhance how you work in the supply chain space.
I love that, especially that ideology behind proactive and being reactive. And I think that kind of feeds into my next question, because again, we know what's going around, with like the geopolitics and everything
Yeah,
else. How just giving you experience so far, how would you say, or again, this is totally your perspective, how
yeah.
do you guide teams through to today's evolving landscape? Particularly around, like, say tariffs, supply disruptions, and rising costs as well.
Yeah, I think very, 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 very good questions. There's so many disruptors, I think, in the current landscape. Um, we had COVID, right?
Hmm.
And when COVID happened, how did we handle that? We're going through the tariff situations. I think one of the beauties of working in a global company first is that we able to have global suppliers that have a lot of locations where they can manufacture their products for us, right? But at the same time, we need to understand what that means, right? Um, we need to really build strong relationships with strong suppliers, because then they can help us plan together. We can address these issues together,
I love
right?
that.
It's a lot about doing it together, right? Because they are the experts in their areas. We are bringing the demand on one end, right? So I think that would probably be the first thing. It's about the relationships with our key suppliers, them sharing the risk. We have periodic meetings with our top tier suppliers to address their risk. They bring up their challenges. I think that's important for them to share and for us to also listen, right? Also, we share what we see.
Mhm.
I think it's important in smaller areas to still have ideas of optionalities. Supplier A is producing you this. Is there another location where this can be sourced? Are you seeing geopolitical risk evolving in one region,
Yeah.
right, versus the other? Let's put it where you and I are both based in the US. In a scenario, for example, if we were producing things in the US that were being moved to another country, and all of a sudden you have this escalation in tariff, do we then start sourcing it from another manufacturing unit in another location,
Mm.
right? So that flexibility, I think is how you maybe mitigate in the long term. In the short term, unfortunately, sometimes if it's things that couldn't be predicted, it's hard for the supply chain companies to react, because you cannot just set up a manufacturing facility in 1 month, in 2 months, in 3 months. So
Yeah.
sometimes there could be a need for some joint concessions, right? And then sometimes you need to also see if what have you included into your contract to mitigate this risk. Suppliers look at building some strength into their contracts to help mitigate that risk. We also look to mitigate those risks. And then when situations happen, we have to come to the table and say, first off, is our contract guiding our interests
Yeah.
in this situation? If it's not, then let's work together to solve this. Another point I would say is we need to really leverage real-time data. In this digitalization era, we have so much data available to us. How are we using it? Right? What is the data telling us in real time? Is the data giving us predictive and scope that I'm buying this product from X country and it seems like the cost is already driving up. Why is it driving up? Right? There are a lot of things we can use with data to feed into kind of different models where we test scenarios to see how it plays out. So those are probably some of the points I would raise in how to potentially navigate. But I think short term it's much less flexible.
Mm.
Mid to long term, you have more scenarios you can play with.
I love
But
that.
yeah,
I love that, and especially like just the the analogy you shared towards like again risk awareness, but not only that, data insight.
yeah,
It's so powerful because like again like like data and its values becoming priceless. And so I
yes,
really do appreciate that the fact that that was actually mentioned. So so my next question is around more towards like driving sustainable growth. So, you were shared like again when you joined, like, especially your new role, part of you driving improvements in compliance, you were able to optimize, your supplier spend. Um, and this was under crisis conditions too, by the way. So awesome stuff. But from your experience, how do you balance cost control with the need for speed and flexibility? Is that something you can speak to?
yeah. I mean, you're talking about probably one of the three angles to what we discussed these days, right? Cost, quality, and then kind of speed. I think different. First off, it's again the fundamental starts with the business. What business are you supporting, right? So we support businesses in US, Canada, Argentina. We support multi various businesses going from renewables to upstream. Um, it's important to segment the demand, right? Because in some instances you may need flexibility. So having some flexible contracts, if you are in a business where it picks up and down very
Mhm.
quickly, demand, right? And if, for example, oil and gas, one day you could see crude oil at $90, the
Yeah.
next week you're seeing that $60. Onshore oil and gas has a lot of flexibility because the turnaround time from when you drill a well to complete a well is a matter of weeks. Offshore, the planning is years, right? So what do you do in the onshore agreements? You want to build flexibility into those agreements. And in some instances, you may have to eat up the cost of lack of that flexibility because you've also not created predictability to the supplier. So a supplier is able to help you optimize costs if they have predictability, right? So that there lies some challenge on the on maybe an offshore side, more long-term business. You can partner with suppliers to jointly address risk. If cost is the issue, let's use technology to improve. What can we slim down in the platforms, make it less heavy? Then you drive costs down, but you then work together. But then that's more long term. But I think I would really say it's about segmenting the demand, right? I would say is about giving some flexibility into some of the contracts you have, right? And then also assessing how much lead time you need in terms of that, right? And then if you're talking to any supply chain experts, we always say, what is your total cost of ownership,
Mhm.
right? What is your total cost of ownership on this? You may be missing out on cost, but gaining out somewhere else. What is in plain sight may not always be what is your total cost, right? So what are you trading off in a way? So I think it's important to have that in the back of the mind, and then it's important to play out some of the questions you raised into scenarios. What if this happened? What if this happened? What do we do? What do our suppliers do? How do we jointly solve it? So I think scenario planning is also something that's a toolkit one should have to pressure test these different situations that may come up, and the variables. What if this is high, what would I do? If this is low, what would I do? How would my supplier react? I think those are key things that any strong supply chain focused leader should always have in the back of their mind.
I love that. I just want to quickly double click on something that was mentioned because a few of our listeners might be interested in this topic but might not understand the verbiage per se. So can you sort of break down what the framework is for what a total cost of ownership is? What is the cost of ownership in supply chain?
When you're looking at total cost of ownership, it's not just the dollar you're paying,
I see.
right? So let's use, we're on a laptop right now. Let's
Yeah.
just use, like, everyone, most people can relate to a laptop. So let's just use a laptop. You buy a laptop for maybe $500 or $1,000, right? But in the lifespan of the laptop, how much would it cost in repairs? Do you factor in putting in a warranty, right? Sometimes you go like Best Buy, or I mean, right, and they suggest a warranty, and you say maybe not. But then you paid maybe 500, but then a year and a half later, now you need to repair it, or something happens, or water spills on it,
Mm.
and you don't have the coverage for it. Then you have to replace it because it's beyond that warranty period. Then in that particular scenario, you've actually not assessed the full cost,
Mm.
because if you're looking at what you're purchasing, you should expect and anticipate that there are going to be repairs. You should anticipate that if you have it offline, what is the cost? If you're not able to work today because your laptop is in the shop, what is the cost? Do
I
you
see.
need a backup? Right? So you have to assess, what does it take to have what you need through the life cycle, right? The ownership, the repairs, the maintenance. So total cost would mean different contexts to different items, but it's not just the cost of the purchase. It's beyond that. It's the opportunity. Is the opportunity you giving up, or is the cost of actually not having it functioning, right? So if I have my laptop offline and that disrupts operations, it's not just the cost of the laptop, right? So it's the holistic view. What are all the things that you lose as a result of not having this available to you? So I'm giving you more of a scenario explanation more than a kind of dictation dictionary explanation, but I'm trying to share it to the audience so they can relate with it
Yeah.
in kind of layman terms, and using laptops because I know all of us have laptops, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully most of us are working professionals, so being able to apply that. But you can also apply that to your daily lives, right? In
Yeah.
in products you use at home, and something goes offline, it's not just what you bought, but it's also the fact that when it's disrupted, what is that cost to you?
I mean, that is such a brilliant way to like simplify and give context to what that is. Because a lot of people listening in my hey that word and you sort of explaining the framework or the mindset around that is brilliant. I appreciate that, and that takes us to our next segment. So this one we're going to be talking about what it takes to lead through change and complexity. So again, it's as I've aforementioned, like in an environment. So currently where we are, policy changes, economic shifts, market volatility. These are sort of constants.
Yeah, yeah,
In
yeah.
the last decade. So what framework or mindset has helped you lead your teams forward through all of this?
Oh man, I love that, and I think I probably teased a little bit of that in our introduction when you ask kind of what leadership superpowers, right? Or do you look at? And I would say it's that growth. It's a
Mm,
growth mindset. I think we all have to embrace that. Um, and what that forces me to do is to always look for the positives in any situation, right? Because it's you have to see change, you have to see uncertainty,
mm,
you have to see those things as an opportunity to reset. Maybe we've been stagnant for too long. Now this is shaking us up. So it's a lot about the perspective we have to it, right? If we see it as the end all, then we're going to kind of a spiral of destruction. But if we see it as an opportunity, maybe there's actually some better outcome sitting behind. And I think for supply chain professionals, we're always looking for options. What is the option, right? What is your option? So, despite crisis, despite uncertainty,
mm,
there are always options, right? Shifting, during COVID, some areas completely closed, created opportunities to open in new countries. All of a sudden, Mexico has scaled up, right?
yeah,
Bringing nearer shore um, manufacturing to you, that's maybe reducing your lead time, that's reducing your transportation cost, right? Just simple, basic example. Pre-COVID, a lot of people were not working remotely. Now it's enabled more flexibility.
yeah,
If people would take off days off because they had to go to a doctor's appointment, now they can go to a doctor's appointment and continue working at home. So it's important that we always look out for the opportunities in uncertain times. Because if we only look at the downside to it, then we've missed out
mm,
on value. Is kind of my view on it. But I would point to say having growth mindset does not mean you don't look at a realistic situation, right? You're not all of a sudden becoming, this person that's not looking at what the downside looks like and it's this is the reality of the situation. You still have to be realistic, but it's despite these conditions, what can we do?
I love that.
That's really what it's all about. And then the long ball. What does this look like in the future? Does Can we transform as a result of this, right? In the US, for example, we've changed regimes. We are an integrate. I work for an integrated company where we invest both in oil and gas and renewables. You you have the that creates options because you have flexibility. Maybe there's a part of the business that's not opportune to scale up depending on the climate and the environment. But you have opportunities in another area. That applies to with the supply space. You may have a small supplier that all of a sudden you discovered actually had more flexibility than your largest supplier. But if you're not paying attention and understanding the landscape, then you miss out on this. If you're not actually pressure testing and saying,
Mm.
definitely there has to be some good out of this, then that kind of helps you shape how you manage the situation.
I love that. I mean, I've read a lot about the growth mindset, like different interpretations, but this is the first time I'm actually seeing it interpreted into the interpretation this way, and I like this perspective, because one thing you mentioned is just seeing just being able to dwell in that ability to pick an opportunity to reset. It's such a brilliant perspective. I really do appreciate that. And I think that's a perfect segue, because it's taking us to, like, the last segment of our conversation here. So here I want to highlight a part about just what empowerment culture and the leadership legacy you've been able to build and have, because like you have a diverse work experience, working for consulting, going into oil and gas. And so, from your experience that you saw building out and scaling your teams, how do you intentionally build a culture that empowers your team to not only lead but adapt and grow? So even if when you're not there, for example, you have to go on holiday with the wife and kids, but they are able to still stay and perform to expectations.
I like that last part, right? I think I would first say, what does it take, right, for me to be absent and the team thrive? I think it has to do with our insecurities.
Mm,
I have been around where maybe your job security, you're feeling empowered, makes you want to hold on to things,
mm,
right? But for me, I actually try to role model being able to take time off as an opportunity for others to develop. Who's my delegates? That's an opportunity for the person to step up and demonstrate their leadership capabilities,
yeah,
right? But maybe taking a step back broader, how does that work? It starts with kind of clarity of purpose. What are we trying to achieve as a team? What are the frameworks that guide us, from business context, from corporate priorities, from corporate cultures, from management systems?
mm,
That sets a boundary. And then we are free to play within that boundary, right? It's kind of my leadership approach to it, right? You I don't want you to feel like I'm micromanaging you. I want to give you my trust,
yeah,
and you then use that trust to grow. I think it's important to have an environment that's psychologically safe.
I love that.
As a leader, you have to show that you're vulnerable. You have to show that you make mistakes. You have to show that we can learn from that mistakes. Because if as a leader, you cannot show that, your team cannot role model that. Which means if you're out, everything stops. That takes us back to risk, business continuity.
Yeah.
If I'm not around and the business has to shut down, I've not built a resilient business,
Mm,
right? What is the delegation to which you are approved authorization? And if I'm not around, what needs to be escalated, right? So I think it's something about that clarity in what's allowed. I think it's important to stretch your team on challenging tasks and be supportive of them. And when you say supportive, it doesn't mean you're doing the work for them. It's being on their side on the journey to growth. I gave you this task. I know you may struggle with it, but I'm here to support you. I'm your resource to support you.
well,
But then you've prepared them to assess, to know maybe the stakeholder, the different people within the organization that they can leverage, right? You mature that thought in a way, and you have to reward people that actually take initiative, that show accountability,
Mm,
right? So if your reward system is tailored towards improvements, towards driving change, towards ensuring that the business is running a good way, people would respond to it. People want to come to work and feel that there's a sense of purpose to
mm.
why they come in. And if you can create that sense of purpose, then it's easy for them to follow. Um, and the last for me is the open culture. There shouldn't be no holds bar, right? There shouldn't be any challenge they have that they should not feel comfortable being able to discuss, right? And being a soundboard to listen to, and knowing that it's confidential if it's needed to, right? In a way. So I think it's about the environment you set up.
I love that, and that environment and the fact that you mentioned psychological safety. I think that's a catalyst for so much, because you providing that environment, that means like, hey, you're open to have they're okay to have an open culture, because they can share fears, concerns, and with you, because you've created that environment for them. I love that. That's such a brilliant response. So we're sort of like, so towards my last question here. So what most people do not know is you're actually a father of five. And I can imagine balancing work and family can feel chaotic. And so just so our audience can take away, what has been your personal experience, like, building a family and also building like your co-MRE as well?
So maybe then I will answer that maybe in two ways,
Okay.
right? The first, how has kind of leadership helped, on the family side, and
Yeah.
then on the other side, how has family helped, right? Because there may be some people that have kids that can
Mhm.
relate to, and there may be parts of the audience that don't have kids. So kind of take the two approach to it. I would say on the corporate side, the lessons learned over